The candles had not even burned halfway down when Eleanor Whitmore rose from her chair and walked straight out of the ballroom, leaving 300 guests staring after her and one man frozen with a glass of wine halfway to his lips. Nathaniel Gray, the Duke of Ashford, did not chase her. He could not. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting to see what he would do, and a duke does not run after a woman in front of the entire county. So he stood there, his jaw tight, watching the door swing shut behind her white gown, and something inside his chest twisted so hard he nearly forgot how to breathe. An hour earlier she had been laughing at something he said, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm as they moved through the steps of a dance neither of them wanted to end. He had felt, for the first time in years, that the room around him did not matter. Only her voice mattered, only the way she tilted her head when she was amused, only the small gap between her words and her true thoughts that he found himself desperate to close. And then, without warning, without a single word of explanation, she had excused herself and vanished into the night. His mother noticed his silence first. Lady Margaret Gray approached him with a fan pressed to her chest, her eyes sharp with concern disguised as curiosity. "You look as though someone has stolen something from you," she said quietly. "Perhaps someone has," Nathaniel answered, though he could not explain what. He barely knew Eleanor Whitmore. They had met only that evening, introduced by a cousin who thought it amusing to pair the county's most eligible duke with a young woman nobody quite recognized. He did not know her family, her fortune, or her reasons for being at the ball at all, and yet the empty chair beside him felt heavier than any absence he had known. He asked his cousin, Charlotte, who she was. "Eleanor Whitmore," Charlotte said, snapping open her fan. "Her family used to have some standing, I believe, before her father's business troubles. I only invited her because her aunt begged me. I did not expect her to catch your attention, of all people." "She didn't catch my attention," Nathaniel said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "I only wondered why she left so suddenly." Charlotte studied him for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Careful, cousin. A duke's interest is a dangerous thing to give to a woman with no name left to protect her." He said nothing more that night, but he could not sleep. He lay awake replaying the dance, the way her fingers had trembled slightly when their hands touched, the way she had glanced toward the door twice before finally leaving, as though bracing herself for something. It was not the behavior of a woman who simply grew tired of a party. It was the behavior of someone running from a fear she could not name aloud. By morning, he had made a decision that surprised even himself. He would find out why she left. He did not tell his mother, nor his cousin, nor his closest friend and estate manager, Peter Lang, who had known him since boyhood and could always read the restlessness on his face. Instead, Nathaniel simply ordered his carriage prepared and told the household he had business in the countryside that required his personal attention. It was, in its own way, entirely true. The Whitmore estate, when he finally found it after 2 days of careful, discreet inquiry, was nothing like he expected. It was modest, its gardens slightly overgrown, its stone walls in need of repair that no one seemed able to afford. A house that had once held grandeur now wore the quiet exhaustion of a family trying very hard to appear as though nothing had changed. He did not announce himself as the Duke of Ashford. He gave only his name, Nathaniel Gray, and asked to speak with the lady of the house on a matter of some importance. It was a foolish disguise, he knew, easily seen through by anyone who paid attention to society papers. But he wanted, just once, to be looked at as a man and not a title. The servant who answered the door hesitated before letting him wait in a small sitting room, its furniture faded but carefully kept. A single vase of fresh flowers on the table, as though someone still insisted on beauty despite everything else falling away. When Eleanor entered the room, her face went pale. "You?" she said, before catching herself and offering a stiff, proper curtsy. "Mr. Gray, I did not expect, that is, I was not told anyone was calling." "I imagine not," Nathaniel said. "I did not send word ahead." Her eyes flicked to the door, then to the window, as though searching for an escape route even now. "Why have you come? If this concerns the ball, I assure you there is no need for—" "I only wish to know why you left," he said simply. "You did not say goodbye. You did not even finish your tea. One moment you were laughing, and the next your chair was empty and I was left wondering what I had done wrong." Eleanor's composure cracked for just a moment, a flicker of something raw crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "You did nothing wrong, Mr. Gray. I simply remembered an obligation I had forgotten." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Nathaniel did not press her, not yet. Instead, he glanced around the room, taking in the careful, quiet poverty dressed up as normalcy, and understood, without needing to be told, exactly what obligation had pulled her away. She had seen something, or heard something, that reminded her she did not belong at a ball full of wealth and title. She had fled before anyone could look too closely and see the truth of her family's fall. "I understand more than you think," he said gently. "You understand nothing," Eleanor snapped, then immediately looked ashamed of her own sharpness. "Forgive me. I am not myself today." "There is nothing to forgive." He took a small step closer, careful not to crowd her. "I only wish to see you again. That is all. I have no expectations, Miss Whitmore, and no judgments to make." She studied him for a long moment, as though trying to determine whether he was telling the truth or simply being polite in the way that men of his position often were, saying kind things they did not truly mean. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to soften her, if only slightly. "You should not have come," she said, though her voice had lost its edge. "If anyone learns the Duke of Ashford called upon my family's house, the talk will be unbearable. For you and for me both." "Let them talk," Nathaniel said. "I have never much cared what people say behind closed doors." "That is easy for a duke to say," she replied, and for the first time, the corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close enough to give him hope. "The rest of us do not have that luxury." He wanted to ask her more, about her father, about the trouble that had clearly settled over the household like a fog no one spoke of directly, about why a woman with such quiet strength in her eyes should ever feel she had to run from a room simply because she did not have enough money in her name. But he sensed that pushing further would only push her away entirely, and something in him, something he did not yet fully understand, refused to let that happen. "May I call again?" he asked instead. Eleanor hesitated, glancing once more toward the window, as though checking that no one was watching from the garden. "That would not be wise." "I did not ask if it was wise," Nathaniel said. "I asked if I may." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant sound of a cart passing on the road outside. Finally, Eleanor let out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything she had been holding in since the ball. "If you must," she said quietly, "but you must come as Mr. Grey, not as anyone else. My family cannot afford the kind of attention a duke would bring to this house." He agreed, though even as he said the words, he wondered how long he could keep such a secret in a world where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business before the ink on the gossip was even dry. But for now, it was enough. He had found her again. He had seen the flicker of trust behind her guarded eyes, and as he climbed back into his carriage and watched the modest house grow smaller behind him, Nathaniel Grey understood, with a certainty that startled him, that he was not going to let Eleanor Whitmore disappear a second time. The road back to London stretched long and quiet, but his mind stayed fixed on the sitting room, on the flowers someone had insisted on keeping fresh despite hardship, on the way Eleanor's voice had wavered just slightly when she admitted he should not have come. There was a story there, buried beneath careful politeness and practiced composure, and Nathaniel found himself more determined than ever to uncover it, piece by piece, no matter what it cost him. He did not yet know how deep her family's troubles ran, nor how many people would try to keep the two of them apart once word began to spread. He did not know about the whispers already forming in drawing rooms across the county, nor about the man who had watched Eleanor dance with the Duke that night with a jealousy sharp enough to cut. All he knew, as the carriage rolled on through the darkening countryside, was that an empty chair beside him at a ball had somehow become the loudest thing in his entire life, and he intended to make certain it never sat empty again. By the time he reached his own estate late that evening, Peter Lang was waiting for him in the study, arms crossed, a knowing look already forming on his face. "You went to see her," Peter said. It was not a question. Nathaniel poured himself a drink and did not bother denying it. "I did. And I intend to see her again," Nathaniel said, setting down his glass. "Whatever it takes." Peter studied his friend for a long moment, weighing the seriousness in his voice against everything he knew about the dangers such a pursuit might bring, both to Nathaniel's position and to the fragile reputation of a family already teetering on the edge of ruin. But he said nothing more that night, only nodded once, because he had known Nathaniel Grey long enough to understand that once the Duke set his mind to something, there was very little in this world that could turn him away from it. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear over the darkened hills, and somewhere across the county, in a small sitting room lit by a single lamp, Eleanor Whitmore sat by the window long after the visit had ended, wondering if she had just made the greatest mistake of her life, or the very best decision she would ever make. A carriage door slammed shut outside the Whitmore estate 3 days later, and Eleanor's mother, Margaret, rushed to the window with her hand pressed against her chest, certain that ruin had finally arrived to collect what little remained of their name. What she saw instead was a plain, unmarked carriage and a man she did not recognize, dressed simply, without the crest or the finery that would have announced his true rank to anyone watching. "Who is that?" Margaret demanded, turning to her daughter with sharp suspicion. "A friend," Eleanor said, though her voice betrayed more nerves than the word suggested. "Nothing more. We do not have friends who arrive in unmarked carriages, Eleanor. We barely have friends at all these days." Margaret's tone was not unkind, only tired, worn down by months of watching their world shrink around them. "Your father's debts have already cost us the East Wing and half the staff. I will not have you inviting scandal into whatever we have left." "It is not scandal, Mother. It is simply a man who wished to call upon me." Margaret's eyes narrowed, studying her daughter's face with the particular sharpness only a mother could manage. "A man who arrives without warning and without a card is not calling properly, Eleanor. He is hiding something, or you are hiding something from me, and I suspect it may be both." Eleanor did not answer, because there was no honest answer she could give without revealing the truth, and the truth felt too large and too dangerous to speak aloud in a house already bracing for the next disaster. So she simply excused herself and went to greet Nathaniel in the garden instead, where the roses her mother refused to let die grew wild and unruly along a crumbling stone path. "Your mother suspects something," Eleanor said the moment they were alone, walking slowly along the path with careful distance between them. "Does she know who I am?" "No, but she is not a foolish woman. She will find out eventually, and when she does, I fear what it will mean for this house." Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You must understand, Mr. Gray, that my family's situation is worse than most people realize. My father's business ventures failed disastrously 2 years ago. We lost nearly everything. The only reason we still hold this house is because a distant relation intervened, and even that arrangement grows more uncertain by the month." Nathaniel listened without interrupting, without the pity she seemed to expect, and clearly dreaded. "Why do you tell me this now?" "Because I want you to understand what you are involving yourself with, before it becomes something neither of us can undo." Her voice grew quieter. "If it becomes known that the Duke of Ashford has taken an interest in a ruined family, the talk will destroy whatever chance we have left of arranging anything respectable for my younger sister. People will say I trapped you, or worse, that I schemed for your fortune from the very start." "Let them say what they like," Nathaniel said, echoing the same stubbornness he had shown days before. "I did not come here for your family's fortune, Miss Whitmore, because you have none. And I did not come here for your name, because half of London already whispers that it carries no weight. I came because when you danced with me, for the first time in longer than I care to admit, I forgot entirely that I was a duke." Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the only sound the soft rustle of wind moving through the overgrown roses. Then she looked away, blinking quickly, as though determined not to let him see how deeply his words had struck her. "You should not say such things to me," she whispered. "It only makes this harder." "Makes what harder?" "Walking away, when the time comes, as it inevitably must." Nathaniel stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to meet his eyes. "What if I have no intention of walking away at all?" Before she could answer, a voice called from the house, sharp and urgent. "Eleanor, come inside at once." They both turned to see Margaret standing on the terrace, her face pale, a letter clutched tightly in her hand. Eleanor hurried toward the house, Nathaniel following a few steps behind, uncertain whether he was welcome to witness whatever crisis had just arrived, but unwilling to leave her side regardless. Inside, Margaret thrust the letter toward her daughter with trembling fingers. "Your father has written from London. The creditors will not wait any longer. If we cannot produce payment within a fortnight, they intend to seize what remains of this house entirely, roses and all." Eleanor's face drained of color as she read the letter herself, her eyes moving quickly over lines that clearly confirmed her mother's fears. "A fortnight," she repeated softly. "We have nothing close to what is owed." "Your father is doing everything he can," Margaret said, though her voice lacked conviction. "But I fear everything he can do will not be enough." Nathaniel stood quietly near the doorway, watching the two women grapple with a disaster that suddenly felt far more real and far more urgent than any ballroom gossip. He thought, briefly, of simply offering to settle the debt himself, of writing a check large enough to erase the entire crisis in a single stroke. But he sensed, even without being told, that such an offer would wound Eleanor's pride far more than it would relieve her worry, especially so soon after she had just confessed how desperately she feared being seen as someone who schemed for his fortune. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked instead, carefully, aware of how thin the line was between helping and overstepping. Margaret turned to him as though noticing him properly for the first time. taking in his plain clothes with fresh suspicion. "And who exactly are you, sir, to be offering assistance to a family you barely know?" "Mother, please," Eleanor began, but Nathaniel raised a hand gently, stopping her. "It is a fair question," he said, and then, before Eleanor could stop him, he added, "My name is Nathaniel Gray. I am the Duke of Ashford." The room went utterly silent. Margaret's face shifted through several expressions in rapid succession, shock giving way to something that looked almost like fear, before settling finally into a wary, calculating stillness that Eleanor recognized all too well from the months since her father's ruin began. "A duke," Margaret repeated slowly. "In my sitting room. Calling on my daughter under a false name." She turned to Eleanor with an expression that mixed anger and disbelief in equal measure. "You knew this, and you said nothing?" "I did not want it to matter," Eleanor said quietly. "I did not want you to look at him and see only his title, the way everyone else does." "And what did you want me to see instead?" Margaret asked, though her voice had softened slightly, some of the anger draining away into weary confusion. Eleanor glanced at Nathaniel, and for the first time since he had arrived, she allowed herself to answer honestly, without the careful walls she usually kept so firmly in place. "I wanted you to see a man who came back for me, even after everything he must have learned about our family's ruin. I wanted you to see that, just once, before it inevitably becomes complicated by everything he represents." Margaret looked between them for a long moment, and Nathaniel could see the calculations running behind her eyes, weighing the danger of scandal against the desperate, undeniable possibility that a duke's interest, however complicated, might be the very thing that saved her family from utter collapse. But whatever conclusions she reached, she kept them to herself for now, folding the creditor's letter carefully and setting it aside. "You should go, Your Grace," she said finally, though her tone had lost its earlier sharpness. "Before anyone in the village notices your carriage and begins asking questions we are not prepared to answer." Nathaniel nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution even as every instinct urged him to stay. "May I call again?" Margaret hesitated, glancing at her daughter, whose expression held a silent plea that needed no words to translate. "I suppose," she said slowly, "that I cannot stop a duke from doing as he pleases, but you will come quietly, and you will understand that whatever happens between you and my daughter, this family cannot survive another scandal on top of everything else we are already carrying." "I understand," Nathaniel said, and he meant it fully, though he could not yet know just how difficult that promise would be to keep once the whispers began. Once the wrong person noticed his carriage on the wrong road at the wrong hour. Once a rival with far less honorable intentions decided that Eleanor Whitmore's sudden connection to a duke was a threat worth destroying by any means necessary. He left the estate that evening with the weight of the fortnight deadline pressing on his thoughts, already turning over quiet, careful ways he might help without wounding Eleanor's pride or exposing her family to further judgment. But as his carriage rolled away down the darkening road, he noticed, in the distance, another rider watching from beneath the shadow of a large oak tree, still and silent, before turning his horse away and disappearing into the dusk. Nathaniel did not think much of it at the time. He had no way of knowing that the rider was Edmund Carlyle, a man who had watched Eleanor dance with the Duke at the ball with a jealousy sharp enough to poison every kind thought he had ever held toward her, and who had spent the days since quietly gathering information, waiting for the perfect moment to turn the Duke's growing affection into a weapon aimed squarely at Eleanor's fragile reputation. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Eleanor sat once again by her window, watching the road where Nathaniel's carriage had long since disappeared. For the first time since her father's ruin began, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope, even as a small, persistent voice in the back of her mind warned her that hope, in a world so quick to judge and so eager to punish, was often the most costly thing a woman in her position could afford to feel. She did not yet know about Edmund Carlyle watching from the shadows. She did not know how quickly the fortnight would arrive, or how much would change before it did. All she knew, as she finally closed her eyes and let sleep take her, was that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not entirely alone in facing whatever came next. Edmund Carlyle stood before a mirror in his London townhouse, adjusting his cravat with far more care than the garment deserved, his mind occupied entirely with the image that had haunted him since the ball. Eleanor Whitmore, laughing in the arms of the Duke of Ashford, her face lit with a joy she had never once shown him in the 2 years he had quietly courted her family's favor, hoping her father's fortune would eventually make her a suitable match. That fortune was gone now, and with it, most men would have abandoned any interest in her entirely. But Edmund's interest had never truly been about her fortune. It had been about possession, about the quiet certainty he had built over years that Eleanor Whitmore would, eventually, belong to him, whether she willingly agreed or not. Seeing her stolen so easily by a duke, a man who could offer her everything Edmund could not, had transformed his quiet obsession into something far more dangerous. "You look troubled," said his sister Constance, entering the room without knocking, as was her habit. She had always been able to read him better than anyone else in the family. "This is about the Whitmore girl again, isn't it?" "It is about the Duke of Ashford making a fool of himself over a family with nothing left to offer," Edmund said sharply. "I have seen his carriage on the road to their estate twice this week alone." Constance raised an eyebrow. "And you have been watching, I take it. That seems like a great deal of effort for a woman you claim no longer interests you." "I never said she no longer interests me." Edmund turned from the mirror, his expression hardening into something colder than his sister had seen from him in years. "I said her fortune is gone. That does not mean I intend to let a duke simply take what I have spent years positioning myself to claim." "And what exactly do you intend to do about it?" Constance asked, though her tone suggested she already dreaded the answer. Edmund did not respond immediately. Instead, he moved to his writing desk and retrieved a folded piece of paper, one he had been composing carefully over the past 2 days, each word chosen with deliberate precision. "I intend to remind the Duke and everyone in London who matters exactly what kind of family he has attached his name to. Ruined men do desperate things, Constance, and desperate men's daughters are rarely as innocent as they appear. You would spread lies about her." Constance's voice carried genuine alarm now. "Edmund, that could destroy her entirely. It could destroy her family. It could also save her from making the greatest mistake of her life," Edmund said coolly, though even he seemed to hear how hollow the justification sounded as it left his mouth. "A duke will never truly marry a woman with nothing to her name, Constance. He will use her for his own amusement, grow bored and cast her aside within a year, and then where will she be? Ruined twice over, with no fortune and no reputation left at all. Better she understand that now, before her heart is entirely lost, and return her attention to men who can actually offer her a respectable future." "Men like you mean," Constance said flatly. Edmund did not answer, which was answer enough. 3 days later, the first whispers began to circulate through London's drawing rooms, carried on the particular kind of gossip that spreads faster than any official news ever could. It began innocently enough, a comment here, a raised eyebrow there, about the Duke of Ashford's mysterious visits to a fallen family's estate. But within days, the whispers had grown teeth, twisted by Edmund's careful, deliberate additions into something far uglier. Eleanor Whitmore, the stories now suggested, had a history of attaching herself to wealthy men before her family's ruin, had perhaps even orchestrated her own family's introduction to society events specifically to snare a fortune through marriage, using whatever means necessary to secure herself a future her father's failed business could no longer guarantee. None of it was true, but truth, Eleanor was quickly learning, mattered very little once a story took root in the fertile soil of London gossip. She first heard the rumors from her aunt, who arrived at the estate in a state of near hysteria, clutching a letter from a mutual acquaintance that repeated the worst of the whispers in careful, gleeful detail. "They are saying you schemed for the Duke's attention," her aunt said, pacing the sitting room floor with an energy that made Eleanor's stomach turn. "That you have done this sort of thing before, targeting wealthy men before your father's troubles even began. No, Lenore, if this reaches the wrong ears, it will not only ruin your chances, it will ruin your sisters as well. No respectable family will consider a match with either of you if society believes you to be some sort of calculating fortune hunter." "I have done nothing of the sort," Eleanor said, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. "I barely spoke to the Duke before the ball. I did not seek his attention. If anything, I fled from it. It does not matter what actually happened," her aunt said grimly. "It only matters what people believe happened, and right now, half of London believes the worst." Eleanor sat heavily in a chair near the window, the same window where she had watched Nathaniel's carriage disappear down the road only nights before, filled with a cautious hope that now felt impossibly naive. She thought of her mother's warning, of the fragile balance the family had been trying to maintain, and understood, with sinking clarity, exactly what these rumors would mean if they continued to spread unchecked. When Nathaniel arrived that afternoon, he found her in a state she had never allowed him to see before, her composure entirely cracked, her eyes red from tears she had tried and failed to hide. "You have heard then," he said quietly, closing the door of the sitting room behind him. "Half of London has heard," Eleanor said bitterly. "They are saying I schemed for you, that I have made a habit of trapping wealthy men before, that my family's ruin was somehow part of some elaborate design to secure a better match through marriage. She let out a hollow laugh that held no humor at all, as though anyone would choose ruin as a strategy. I do not believe a word of it, Nathaniel said firmly, crossing the room to sit beside her, and anyone who knows you at all would recognize it as nonsense the moment they heard it. That is generous of you, Your Grace, but generosity does not undo damage that has already spread through every drawing room in the city. Eleanor pressed her hands against her eyes for a moment, steadying herself before continuing. My sister is 16. In 2 years, she will need to make her own match. If this follows our family, it will follow her too, and she has done absolutely nothing to deserve that. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, turning over possibilities in his mind, each one weighed against the very real danger that any misstep now could make everything worse rather than better. Do you know where these rumors began? No, Eleanor admitted, only that they seem to have appeared suddenly and grown far too quickly to be simple, natural gossip. Then someone started them deliberately. Nathaniel's expression darkened as understanding settled over him. Someone who wanted to see you disgraced, or wanted to see me pull away from you entirely. Eleanor looked up at him sharply. You think someone is doing this on purpose? Who would benefit from such cruelty? I do not know yet, Nathaniel said, but I intend to find out. He did not have to search long. 2 days later, at a dinner hosted by his own mother, he found himself seated across from Edmund Carlyle for the first time, and something in the man's carefully composed smile, the slight glint of satisfaction in his eyes whenever Eleanor's name happened to arise in conversation, told Nathaniel everything he needed to know, without a single word of confession ever being spoken aloud. You seem quite invested in the Whitmore family's misfortunes, Mr. Carlyle, Nathaniel said evenly, watching the other man's reaction with careful attention. Merely concerned for a family I have known for some years, Edmund replied smoothly. It troubles me to see Miss Whitmore's name spoken of so unkindly around the city, though I suppose such talk is difficult to prevent once it begins, particularly when a woman's own past choices provide such fertile ground for speculation. The insult was delivered with such practiced ease that anyone listening casually might have missed it entirely, mistaking it for genuine sympathy. But Nathaniel heard it clearly, and something cold and furious settled into his chest. I was not aware Miss Whitmore's past choices were a matter of public record, Mr. Carlyle, he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several nearby guests glance over with sudden interest. Perhaps you might enlighten the table on precisely which choices you refer to, since you seem so remarkably well informed. A flicker of unease crossed Edmund's face, quickly masked. I only repeat what others have said, Your Grace. I make no claims of my own. How convenient, Nathaniel said coolly, to spread a rumor while claiming only to repeat it. The table fell into an uncomfortable silence, and Nathaniel's mother, sensing the tension building between the two men, quickly redirected the conversation toward safer topics. But the exchange had confirmed everything Nathaniel needed to know. Edmund Carlyle was behind the rumors, whether through direct fabrication or careful, deliberate encouragement of whispers that served his own interests. And a man capable of such cruelty toward a woman he claimed to care for was not a man who would simply stop once challenged politely at a dinner table. Later that evening, walking alone in the garden to clear his thoughts, Nathaniel found Edmund waiting for him near the fountain, the pleasant mask he wore at dinner entirely gone now, replaced by something far more honest and far more dangerous. You should walk away from her, Your Grace, Edmund said without preamble, for her own good, if not for yours. Is that a threat, Mr. Carlyle? It is a warning. Edmund's voice remained calm, almost reasonable, which somehow made it more unsettling than open anger would have been. You are a duke. You will grow bored of her eventually, as men of your position always do with women beneath their station, and when you do, she will be left with nothing. No fortune, no reputation, no prospects. I, at least, have always intended to marry her properly, ruin or no ruin. My intentions have never wavered, even when hers so clearly have, running to whatever wealthy title happens to catch her eye at any given ball. You speak of her as though she were an object to be claimed rather than a person capable of choosing for herself, Nathaniel said, his voice low and dangerous now. And I think, Mr. Carlyle, that you have made yourself very clear tonight. You did not spread those rumors out of concern for Eleanor's reputation. You spread them because you could not bear to watch her choose someone else. Edmund's composure finally cracked, a flash of raw anger breaking through the careful mask. She was always meant to be mine, long before you ever noticed her at that ball, and I do not intend to simply stand aside and watch a duke take what should rightfully belong to me. simply because he has a title and I do not. She belongs to no one but herself, Nathaniel said firmly, and I suggest you remember that before you do any further damage to her name, or mine own patience will run considerably shorter than you might hope. He turned and walked away before Edmund could respond, his mind already racing ahead to what needed to happen next. The rumors would not simply fade on their own, not with someone as determined and bitter as Edmund Carlyle actively fanning their flames. If he wanted to protect Eleanor, truly protect her, he would need to do something far more decisive than quiet visits and private reassurances. He would need to make his intentions known publicly, undeniably, in a way that left no room for whispered doubt or malicious speculation. But making such a declaration carried its own risks. Risks that could either save Eleanor's reputation entirely, or destroy it beyond any hope of recovery, depending on how society chose to receive it. As he climbed into his carriage that night, Nathaniel understood that whatever he decided to do next would determine not only his own future, but the entire future of the woman who had, in the space of only a few short weeks, become impossible for him to imagine living without. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore estate, the fortnight deadline crept closer with each passing day, the creditor's threat looming over the household like a storm cloud that refused to break. Eleanor's father had returned from London with grim news, having secured only a fraction of the funds needed to satisfy their debts, leaving the family facing the very real possibility of losing their home entirely within days. Between the rumors threatening her reputation and the debt threatening her family's last remaining shelter, Eleanor found herself caught in a crisis that seemed to grow more impossible by the hour, with no clear path forward that did not require sacrificing something she was not certain she could bear to lose. Her father, Charles Whitmore, sat slumped in his study late one evening, a single candle burning low beside a stack of unpaid letters, when Eleanor found him staring blankly at nothing, his once proud posture bent under a weight he could no longer hide from his family. "Father," she said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "You should rest. You have not slept properly in days." "How can I rest?" Charles said, his voice hoarse, "when I have failed the very people I am meant to protect? Your mother married me believing I would give her a comfortable life. Instead, I have given her ruin, and now I cannot even give you and your sister a roof that is certain to remain over your heads." Eleanor crossed the room and sat beside him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You did not fail us on purpose, Father. Business ventures fail. It happens to honest men as easily as dishonest ones. Does it matter which kind of man I am, if the outcome is the same?" Charles asked bitterly. "Your mother deserves better. You and your sister deserve better." "We deserve a father who does not give up," Eleanor said firmly. "And I do not intend to let this house fall without a fight, whatever it takes." Charles studied his daughter for a long moment, something like reluctant admiration flickering across his tired features. "You have always had more strength than I gave you credit for, Eleanor. Your mother tells me a duke has taken an interest in you." Eleanor stiffened slightly. "It is complicated, Father." "Everything worthwhile usually is." Charles managed a small, weary smile. "I will not pretend I am not tempted to see it as some manner of solution to our troubles. But I want you to know, whatever happens between you and the Duke, I will not force your hand toward him simply to save this house. You deserve to choose your own path, not one dictated by my failures." The words settled over Eleanor with unexpected weight, and she found herself blinking back tears she had not expected to feel. "Thank you, Father. That means more to me than you know." But even as she said it, she understood the cruel irony of the situation. Her father's refusal to pressure her only made the decision feel heavier, because now, whatever she chose, she would have to choose it fully, without the excuse of duty or obligation to soften the weight of her own heart's desires. The following morning brought worse news still. A letter arrived from the creditors, moved up by 3 days, demanding payment within a week rather than a fortnight, citing unspecified concerns about the family's ability to satisfy the debt at all. Eleanor suspected, though she could not prove it, that Edmund Carlyle's influence extended even here, using whatever connections his family held to tighten the noose around the Whitmores just as the rumors continued to spread through London's drawing rooms. She confronted him directly that same afternoon, finding him at a small gathering hosted by a mutual acquaintance, unable to bear the uncertainty a moment longer. "You are behind this," she said quietly, pulling him aside the moment she found an opportunity to speak without an audience. "The rumors, the creditors moving their deadline, all of it." Edmund's expression remained carefully neutral, though something in his eyes betrayed a flicker of satisfaction he could not entirely hide. "I do not know what you mean, Eleanor." "Do not insult me by pretending," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. "I have known you for 2 years, Edmund. I know exactly what you are capable of when you do not get what you believe belongs to you. And what is it you believe belongs to me? He asked, his tone deceptively mild. You have made it clear enough, in your own way, Eleanor said. You believe I owe you something, simply because you spent 2 years courting my family's fortune before it disappeared. But I never once promised myself to you, Edmund. Not then, and certainly not now. You danced with a duke, Edmund said, his careful mask finally slipping into something colder and more honest. You let him visit your family's home, disguised under a false name, as though you were ashamed to be seen with him publicly, or perhaps ashamed of what such a connection truly reveals about your intentions. My intentions are none of your concern, Eleanor said sharply. They became my concern the moment your family's ruin left you without protection, Edmund replied, stepping closer, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear it. A duke will use you and discard you, Eleanor. I am offering you something real. Marriage, respectability, a chance to rebuild what your father destroyed. All you need do is end this foolish infatuation and accept what I have always intended to give you. And if I refuse? Something dark passed behind Edmund's eyes. Then I suppose your family will simply have to face the consequences of your choices, whatever they may be. Eleanor stepped back from him, disgust and fear tangling together in her chest. You would truly see my family destroyed simply because I will not marry you? I would see you understand the value of what I offer, Edmund said, before you lose everything chasing a fantasy that a man of his position will never truly allow to become permanent. She left the gathering shortly after, her hands shaking as she climbed into her family's modest carriage, the weight of Edmund's threats pressing down on her with a force that made it difficult to breathe. By the time she reached home, she had made a decision, one that filled her with a dread so heavy it felt physical. She would end things with Nathaniel, not because she wanted to, not because her heart had changed in any way, but because she could not, in good conscience, allow her family to suffer further because of feelings she had allowed herself to indulge too freely. If distancing herself from the Duke could calm the rumors and perhaps ease whatever pressure Edmund had placed on the creditors, then it was a sacrifice she felt obligated to make, however much it cost her personally. When Nathaniel arrived the following day, expecting the same warmth that had grown steadily between them over the past weeks, he found instead a wall of careful, deliberate distance that startled him immediately. "Eleanor, what is wrong?" he asked, watching her retreat toward the far side of the sitting room the moment he entered. "Nothing is wrong," she said, though her voice lacked any conviction. "I simply think it would be best if you did not call again." Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Why? 2 days ago you welcomed my visits. What has changed?" "I have thought more carefully about our situation," Eleanor said, forcing herself to meet his eyes even as everything in her wanted to look away. "You are a duke, Nathaniel. I am the daughter of a ruined man, currently the subject of vicious rumors that grow worse by the day. This connection between us can only end poorly, for both of us, but especially for me and my family. It would be wiser for everyone if we simply ended it now, before it grows any more complicated." "This is not about wisdom," Nathaniel said, crossing the room toward her despite her obvious attempt to keep distance between them. "Something has frightened you. Tell me what it is." "Nothing has frightened me," Eleanor insisted, though her voice cracked slightly on the words, betraying the lie even as she spoke it. "Eleanor," Nathaniel's voice softened, though his eyes remained sharp with concern. "I have watched you face your family's ruin with more courage than most men I know. I do not believe for one moment that simple wisdom is what has changed your mind so suddenly. Someone has threatened you." She said nothing, which was answer enough. "Was it Carlyle?" Nathaniel asked, his jaw tightening. Eleanor's silence stretched a moment too long before she finally, reluctantly, nodded. "What did he say to you?" "It does not matter," Eleanor said, though her voice had begun to waver, the careful composure she had built cracking under the weight of everything she had been carrying alone. "What matters is that my family cannot survive further scandal, and every day you continue calling on me, the rumors grow worse, and the creditors grow more impatient. I cannot risk losing everything simply because my own heart has grown foolish." "Your heart is not foolish," Nathaniel said firmly, closing the remaining distance between them despite her earlier retreat. "And I will not simply walk away because a bitter, jealous man has decided to threaten you into submission." "This is not only about me, Nathaniel," Eleanor said, tears finally slipping free despite her best efforts to hold them back. "My mother, my sister, my father, all of them will suffer if I continue this. I cannot be selfish enough to let my own feelings destroy the last of what my family has left." Nathaniel reached out and gently took her hands in his voice softening even further. Then let me help carry this burden with you, instead of asking me to disappear from your life entirely. I do not intend to abandon you simply because circumstances have grown difficult, Eleanor. If anything, that is precisely when a person's true character reveals itself. You do not understand what Edmund is capable of, Eleanor whispered. Then tell me, Nathaniel said. Let me understand fully, so that I might actually help rather than simply guessing at shadows. Slowly, hesitantly, Eleanor recounted the confrontation from the previous day, Edmund's veiled threats, his implication that he held influence over the creditor's sudden change in deadline, his insistence that she owed him her hand simply because of years spent courting a fortune that no longer existed. As she spoke, Nathaniel's expression grew darker with each detail, understanding fully now the depth of Edmund Carlisle's obsession and the very real danger it posed, not only to Eleanor's reputation, but potentially to her family's entire future. He will not simply stop because you push me away, Nathaniel said once she finished. Men like Carlisle rarely accept rejection gracefully, Eleanor. Pushing me away will not protect you. It will only leave you facing him alone, without anyone standing beside you when he decides to escalate further. The truth of his words settled over her slowly, and Eleanor realized, with a sinking feeling, that her plan to distance herself from Nathaniel had been born more from fear and panic than genuine strategy. Edmund's threats would not simply vanish because she ended things with the Duke. If anything, doing so might only embolden him further, convincing him that his cruelty had successfully driven away her only real protection. Then what would you have me do? She asked quietly. Trust me, Nathaniel said simply. Let me stand beside you, publicly, undeniably, in a way that leaves no room for Carlisle's rumors to take further root. I know it carries risk. I know society may judge us harshly for it, but I would rather face that judgment together than watch you retreat into isolation out of fear. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment, searching for any trace of doubt or hesitation, and found none. Only steady, unwavering resolve, the same quiet strength she had first glimpsed the night they danced together at the ball, before everything had grown so complicated. Society will not be kind, she warned. Society is rarely kind to anyone who dares to want something different than what is expected of them, Nathaniel replied. But I have decided I would rather face their unkindness with you beside me than face a comfortable, expected life without you in it at all. For the first time since Edmund's threats had shattered her fragile hope, Eleanor allowed herself to believe, if only cautiously, that perhaps this crisis did not have to end in ruin after all. But even as hope rekindled in her chest, she could not shake the growing certainty that Edmund Carlisle would not simply retreat quietly, once he realized his threats had failed to separate them. If anything, his next move would likely be his most dangerous yet, and neither of them could yet predict exactly what form that danger might take, or how publicly it might unfold once it finally arrived. The invitation arrived 3 days later, addressed to the entire Whitmore family in elegant formal script, requesting their presence at a grand assembly hosted by Nathaniel's own mother, Lady Margaret Grey. Eleanor understood immediately what the invitation meant. Nathaniel intended to make his intentions publicly known, in the most visible setting possible, where no rumor or whispered doubt could survive the plain, undeniable sight of a duke standing openly beside her. Are you certain about this? Eleanor asked when he called on her that afternoon, the invitation still clutched in her hand. Once we appear together publicly, there will be no taking it back. Every eye in London will be watching. I am certain, Nathaniel said, though he could see the fear still lingering behind her eyes. Are you? Eleanor hesitated, glancing toward the window, toward the road that had carried so much uncertainty to her family's door over the past weeks. I am terrified, she admitted honestly, but I think I am more terrified of hiding than of facing whatever comes next. The night of the assembly arrived with a tension that seemed to hum through the very air of the Whitmore household, as Eleanor dressed carefully, her mother fussing over every detail, with a nervous energy that betrayed her own fears about the evening ahead. Margaret had grown warmer toward Nathaniel over the past weeks, watching her daughter bloom under his attention in ways she had not seen since before Charles's ruin began, but even she could not entirely shake her worry about what public exposure might mean for a family already teetering on such fragile ground. You look beautiful, her sister, young Charlotte Whitmore, said softly, watching Eleanor study her reflection in the mirror. Are you frightened? Terribly, Eleanor admitted, managing a small smile for her sister's benefit. But I have decided, fear is not a good enough reason to hide from something I actually want. The assembly hall, when they arrived, glittered with candlelight and the particular restless energy of a room full of people eager for gossip, many of whom had clearly heard whispers about the evening's significance and arrived specifically hoping to witness whatever unfolded. Eleanor felt every eye turn toward her family as they entered, felt the weight of 100 whispered conversations pausing mid-sentence to observe the ruined family who had somehow attracted a duke's public attention. She found Nathaniel near the entrance, waiting for her with an expression that immediately settled some of the anxious flutter in her chest. He offered his arm without hesitation, walking her directly into the center of the room, rather than toward any quiet corner where they might have avoided attention. "Steady," he murmured, feeling the slight tremble in her hand where it rested against his arm. "Whatever happens tonight, I am not leaving your side." They had barely settled near the refreshment table when Edmund Carlyle appeared, moving through the crowd with the deliberate confidence of a man who had planned this confrontation carefully, waiting for precisely the right moment to strike. He positioned himself just close enough that his voice, when he spoke, carried to the small cluster of guests standing nearby, ensuring an audience for whatever he intended to say. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his tone dripping with false pleasantness. "How bold of you to appear so publicly, given the rumors currently circulating about your character. I confess, I did not expect you to show your face at all, let alone on the Duke's own arm." The nearby conversation dimmed instantly, guests turning with poorly disguised curiosity to watch the confrontation unfold. Eleanor felt her stomach drop, but before she could formulate any response, Nathaniel stepped slightly forward, his expression cold and unwavering. "I believe, Mr. Carlyle, that we discussed this matter already at my mother's dinner table," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent cluster of guests. "You claimed only to repeat rumors you had heard elsewhere. I find myself wondering, given how conveniently those rumors seem to follow wherever you happen to be standing, whether you might be their true origin." A murmur rippled through the surrounding crowd, and Edmund's composure flickered, though he quickly recovered. "I only speak what concerns many in society, Your Grace. A woman whose family has fallen so completely, suddenly finding herself the object of a duke's affection, does invite certain questions about her methods." "And what methods would those be, precisely?" Nathaniel asked, his voice growing sharper with barely restrained anger. "Because from where I stand, Mr. Carlyle, I see a woman who fled a ballroom rather than risk anyone discovering her family's difficulties, who resisted my attention for weeks rather than eagerly pursuing it, and who very nearly ended things between us entirely because she feared the damage a connection with me might bring to her family's already fragile situation. Those do not sound like the methods of a calculating schemer to me. They sound like the choices of a woman with more integrity than most of the people currently whispering about her in this very room." Edmund's jaw tightened, his careful mask slipping further under the weight of Nathaniel's steady, public defense. "You know nothing of her true character, Your Grace. You have known her only weeks. I have known her for years, and I can assure you." "You can assure me of nothing," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice now carrying clearly enough that even guests on the far side of the room had turned to listen. "Because I have watched, Mr. Carlyle, how a man who claims to care for a woman behaves when circumstances grow difficult. I have watched you spread rumors to destroy her reputation, threaten her family's already precarious finances, and attempt to force her hand toward marriage, through fear rather than affection. That is not the behavior of a man who loves someone, Mr. Carlyle. That is the behavior of a man who wishes only to possess something he believes belongs to him." The room had gone utterly silent now, every guest hanging on the exchange with rapt, breathless attention. Edmund's face had gone pale, then flushed with fury, aware suddenly of just how badly this confrontation had turned against him, in front of an audience he had intended to use as a weapon. "You have no proof of any such accusations," he said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. "I have Eleanor's own account of your threats," Nathaniel said calmly, "delivered to me directly, in her own words, without prompting or exaggeration. And I suspect, Mr. Carlyle, that if I made inquiries carefully enough among the servants and acquaintances who might have witnessed your recent conversations with the creditors handling the Whitmore family's debts, I would find further confirmation of exactly how far your interference has extended." Something in Edmund's expression cracked entirely at this, a flash of genuine alarm breaking through his crumbling composure, and Eleanor understood, watching him, that Nathaniel's suspicion about the creditors had struck closer to the truth than even she had suspected. "This conversation is beneath either of us," Edmund said stiffly, attempting to salvage some shred of dignity, as he realized the crowd's sympathy had shifted decisively against him. "I have said what needed saying." "Then I suggest you leave, Mr. Carlyle," Nathaniel said, "before you say anything further that might require a more formal response than simple public embarrassment." Edmund cast one final furious glance toward Eleanor, before turning and pushing his way through the crowd, his retreat carrying none of the confident swagger with which he had arrived. The moment he disappeared from the hall, the room seemed to exhale collectively, whispered conversations erupting once more, though their tone now carried something closer to sympathy and curiosity than the malicious speculation that had followed Eleanor for weeks. Nathaniel turned to her immediately, searching her face with obvious concern. "Are you all right?" Eleanor felt tears threatening again, though these carried a different weight than the fear and shame she had grown accustomed to over recent weeks. "You defended me," she said softly, still somewhat stunned by the intensity of what had just unfolded, in front of everyone. "I told you I would not leave your side," Nathaniel said, "and I meant it fully." Before she could respond, Nathaniel's mother approached, her expression unreadable as she studied the young woman her son had so publicly, so dramatically defended in front of the entire assembly. Eleanor braced herself for judgment, certain that whatever goodwill the confrontation with Edmund had earned would surely evaporate once the Duchess weighed in with her own opinion. Instead, Lady Margaret Grey studied Eleanor for a long, careful moment before speaking. "My son has never once, in his entire life, spoken so passionately in defense of anyone," she said finally. "I confess I did not expect it, given everything I had heard about your family's circumstances, but I find myself reconsidering those rumors rather significantly, having witnessed what just occurred." "Thank you, Your Grace," Eleanor managed, still somewhat overwhelmed by the rapid shift in the evening's fortunes. "Do not thank me yet," Lady Margaret said, though something almost like warmth had crept into her expression. "I intend to watch you carefully in the weeks ahead, Miss Whitmore, before I decide whether my son's judgment in this matter deserves my full trust. But I will say this much: a woman who inspires such fierce loyalty, without seeking it through scheming or manipulation, is not a woman easily dismissed as unworthy." As the evening wore on, Eleanor found herself, for the first time since her father's ruin began, moving through a crowded room without the crushing weight of shame and fear pressing down on her shoulders. The rumors would not vanish entirely overnight, she understood that much, but something fundamental had shifted tonight, in front of witnesses who would carry word of what they had seen far faster and far more effectively than any rumor Edmund Carlyle had managed to spread. Later, as the assembly began to wind down and guests started departing into the cool night air, Nathaniel walked Eleanor toward her family's waiting carriage, neither of them quite ready to end the evening despite its exhausting intensity. "You never told me how you knew Carlyle was interfering with the creditors," Eleanor said, glancing up at him curiously. "I did not know for certain," Nathaniel admitted, "not until I watched his reaction tonight. But I suspected it, given his family's connections to several banking interests in London. It seemed a reasonable guess, and thankfully, one that struck true enough to unsettle him. You took quite a risk, accusing him publicly without absolute proof." "Some risks are worth taking," Nathaniel said simply, "particularly when the alternative is watching someone I care for suffer silently under threats and rumors I have the power to challenge." Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the quiet space near the carriage, away from the last stragglers still lingering near the assembly hall's entrance. "Nathaniel, I do not know how to properly thank you for what you did tonight." "You do not need to thank me," he said softly, reaching up to gently brush a stray strand of hair from her face. "I did not defend you tonight out of obligation, Eleanor. I did it because watching you suffer under Carlyle's cruelty, and my own hesitation to act decisively enough, became something I simply could not continue to bear." The words hung between them in the cool night air, carrying a weight neither of them had quite spoken aloud before, though both had clearly felt it building steadily over the past weeks. Eleanor felt her heart racing, uncertain whether from the lingering adrenaline of the evening's confrontation, or from something far more personal now unfolding between them. "I fear I have fallen rather hopelessly in love with you," Nathaniel said quietly, despite every practical reason I might have found to resist it. Eleanor's breath caught entirely, and for a long moment she could not manage any response at all, simply staring up at him as the reality of his words settled fully into her heart. "I have fallen just as hopelessly," she finally whispered, "though I confess I spent a great deal of energy trying to convince myself otherwise, for both our sakes." "And now," Eleanor said, a genuine smile finally breaking through despite everything the evening had demanded of her, "I find I no longer have the strength to keep pretending otherwise." Whatever might have followed between them in that quiet moment was interrupted by her mother's voice calling from the carriage, reminding them both, with obvious amusement, that propriety still demanded certain boundaries even after such a dramatic evening. But as Eleanor climbed into the carriage and looked back at Nathaniel standing beneath the assembly hall's glowing windows, she understood, with a certainty that settled warmly through her entire chest. that whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever damage Edmund Carlyle might still attempt to inflict, she would not face any of it alone again. The road home passed in comfortable, exhausted silence, her mother watching her with a knowing, satisfied expression that required no words to translate. But even as relief and happiness settled over Eleanor for the first time in weeks, a small, cautious voice in the back of her mind reminded her that Edmund Carlyle, humiliated so publicly and so thoroughly, was unlikely to simply accept defeat quietly. Men who believed so completely in their own entitlement rarely surrendered gracefully, and Eleanor suspected, with a shiver she could not quite suppress, that his final move against them had not yet arrived. 2 days after the assembly, a messenger arrived at the Whitmore estate carrying an urgent letter marked with the seal of the family's primary creditor, and Eleanor's hands trembled as she broke it open, bracing herself for the worst. Inside, however, was news that stunned the entire household. The debt, in its entirety, had been settled, paid in full, by an anonymous benefactor whose identity the letter did not disclose, though Eleanor suspected immediately, with a mixture of gratitude and quiet frustration, exactly who was responsible. She confronted Nathaniel that same afternoon, finding him in his study reviewing estate ledgers with Peter Lang, both men looking up in surprise as she swept into the room without waiting to be announced. "You paid my father's debts," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Nathaniel exchanged a glance with Peter, who quietly excused himself, recognizing the private nature of the conversation about to unfold. "I did not want your family to lose their home simply because Carlyle had manipulated the creditors into moving their deadline," Nathaniel admitted once they were alone. "I know you feared how such assistance might look, Eleanor, and I understand if you are angry with me for acting without your permission." "I am not angry," Eleanor said, though her voice carried a complicated mixture of emotions she struggled to fully untangle. "I am grateful, and terrified, and confused all at once. Grateful because my family will not lose everything. Terrified because I fear this only confirms every rumor Carlyle ever spread about me chasing your fortune. And confused because I do not know how to accept such generosity without feeling as though I have compromised something important about who I want to be." Nathaniel rose from his desk and crossed the room to stand before her, his expression gentle but resolute. "I did not settle your father's debt because I expect anything in return, Eleanor, nor because I wish to buy your affection or your family's gratitude. I did it because I have the means to prevent unnecessary suffering, and choosing not to act simply to protect my own reputation from wagging tongues seemed a poor excuse for allowing your family to lose their home. But what will people say when they learn of it?" "Let them say whatever they wish," Nathaniel said, echoing words he had spoken to her many times before, though now they carried a deeper weight, tested and proven through everything they had already weathered together. "I have grown considerably less concerned with society's opinions since the night I watched you disappear from that ballroom, Eleanor, and found myself unable to simply move on and forget you as reason suggested I should." Eleanor felt tears building again, though these carried none of the fear or shame that had accompanied so many of her tears in recent weeks. "I do not know how to properly repay such kindness." "You do not owe me repayment," Nathaniel said softly, reaching for her hands. "But if you truly wish to give me something in return, there is one thing I would ask of you." "What is that?" Nathaniel hesitated only a moment before sinking slowly to one knee before her, and Eleanor felt her entire body go still, scarcely able to breathe as she understood exactly what was about to happen. "Marry me," Nathaniel said simply, his voice steady despite the obvious vulnerability of the moment. "Not because your family needs saving, and not because society expects it of either of us, but because I cannot imagine building any future that does not include you fully within it. I love you, Eleanor Whitmore, entirely and without reservation, and I would consider myself the most fortunate man in England if you agreed to spend the rest of your life beside me." Eleanor's hands trembled as she looked down at him, every fear and doubt that had plagued her over recent weeks suddenly feeling impossibly small against the overwhelming certainty now filling her chest. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Yes, Nathaniel, I will marry you." He rose immediately, gathering her into an embrace that spoke of relief and joy in equal measure, and for a long moment neither of them said anything further, simply holding tightly to each other as the weight of weeks spent fearing they might never reach this point finally lifted entirely from their shoulders. Word of the engagement spread through London within days, and while a few remaining whispers of doubt persisted among the most stubborn gossips, the overwhelming reaction across society proved far warmer than either Eleanor or Nathaniel had dared hope. The public confrontation with Edmund Carlyle had already shifted popular sympathy firmly in Eleanor's favor, and the announcement of the Duke's genuine, heartfelt proposal only solidified what many now recognized as a love story built on substance rather than scheming, however dramatically it had unfolded. Edmund Carlyle, for his part, disappeared from London society almost entirely in the weeks following the assembly, his own reputation too badly damaged by his public humiliation to maintain his usual social standing. Eleanor heard, through occasional second-hand reports, that he had retreated to a distant relative's estate in the north, apparently unwilling to face the continued whispers his own actions had ultimately brought upon himself. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet relief that his threats, at least, would no longer shadow her family's future. The wedding was planned for early autumn, and as the preparations unfolded, Eleanor found herself, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, genuinely happy without the constant undercurrent of fear that had defined so much of the previous year. Her mother, Margaret, threw herself into the wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that seemed to erase years of accumulated worry from her face, while her father, Charles, walked through the estate with a renewed lightness in his step, freed finally from the crushing weight of debts he had feared might destroy his family entirely. On the morning of the wedding, Eleanor stood before her mirror in a gown far finer than anything she had worn even at the ball where this entire journey had begun, and found herself thinking back to that night, to the empty chair she had left behind, to the fear that had driven her from the ballroom before she could allow herself to hope for anything more than a single, stolen dance with a duke she assumed she would never see again. "You look radiant," her mother said, adjusting a final detail of Eleanor's gown with careful, loving hands. "I confess, I never imagined this outcome. That night you came home so pale and quiet after the ball, refusing to speak of what had happened. Neither did I," Eleanor admitted, smiling at her own reflection. "I thought I was simply protecting myself and this family by running from something that felt far too dangerous to risk. And now? Now I understand that some things are worth every risk they demand," Eleanor said softly, "particularly when they turn out to be worth so very much more than the fear ever suggested." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of joy and quiet gratitude. Friends and family gathered to witness a union that had, against considerable odds, survived rumors and threats, and the crushing weight of financial ruin, to arrive finally at this moment of genuine, hard-won happiness. When Nathaniel took Eleanor's hands before the assembled guests, his eyes held none of the careful, guarded distance he had worn the night they first met, only open, unguarded devotion that needed no further words to communicate. That evening, at the wedding celebration held in the grand ballroom of Nathaniel's own estate, Eleanor found herself seated beside her husband at the head of a long table, surrounded by candlelight and laughter and the warm hum of genuine celebration. She glanced around the room, taking in the joyful faces of family and friends who had gathered to witness their beginning, and felt her heart swell with a happiness so complete it nearly overwhelmed her. Nathaniel leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the surrounding celebration. "Do you remember the last ball we both attended together, before everything that followed?" "I remember an empty chair," Eleanor said, smiling, "and a duke who apparently could not bear to see it stay that way." "I could not," Nathaniel agreed, reaching for her hand beneath the table. "I have never quite forgotten how it felt, watching you disappear that night, wondering if I would ever see you again." "Well," Eleanor said, glancing down at their joined hands, at the ring now resting on her finger, "I suppose you need not wonder any longer." "No," Nathaniel agreed, lifting her hand to press a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I suppose I do not." As the celebration continued late into the night, music and laughter filling the grand ballroom that had once seemed so distant and unreachable to a woman fleeing her family's ruin, Eleanor understood, with complete and settled certainty, that whatever challenges still lay ahead in their shared future, she would never again face an empty chair beside her, not while Nathaniel Gray remained determined, as he had proven so many times over, to fill it fully with his unwavering devotion. The chair beside the Duke, once empty and abandoned before midnight, now belonged permanently to the woman who had once fled it in fear, and who had finally learned, through weeks of hardship and courage in equal measure, that some things truly were worth staying for, until the very last dance. A year passed, and the estate that once bore the quiet exhaustion of a family clinging to appearances now stood restored, its gardens tended, its stone walls repaired, filled with the kind of warmth that comes only from a household no longer bracing for disaster. Eleanor's father, Charles, had used a portion of Nathaniel's generosity, offered again despite Eleanor's initial protests, to rebuild a modest but honest trade in shipping goods, determined this time to build something steady rather than reaching for fortunes too large to hold safely. He worked with a humility he had lacked before his ruin, and the business grew slowly but surely, a testament to lessons learned through hardship rather than avoided through comfort. Eleanor's younger sister, Charlotte, blossomed under the family's restored stability, no longer shadowed by rumors that had once threatened to follow her into her own eventual introduction to society. She attended her first proper ball that spring, and Eleanor watched from across the room with quiet pride as her sister danced without the fear that had once gripped her own heart so tightly, a fear Eleanor had fought hard to ensure Charlotte would never have to know so intimately. Nathaniel and Eleanor settled into their marriage with an ease that surprised even those who had watched their courtship unfold with such dramatic intensity. Their estate became known not for cold formality, as so many aristocratic households were, but for genuine warmth, for a duke and duchess who greeted their staff with respect and their tenants with fairness, remembering perhaps more clearly than most in their position what it felt like to stand on the edge of losing everything. Edmund Carlyle's name occasionally surfaced in distant conversation, though rarely with any detail Eleanor cared to dwell upon. She heard, eventually, that he had married a wealthy widow in the north, a match built more on convenience and financial necessity than any genuine affection, and something in Eleanor softened slightly at the news, recognizing in it perhaps a small measure of the same desperation that had once driven her own family to such fear. She did not forgive him entirely for the cruelty he had shown her, but she found, with time, that she no longer carried the weight of anger toward him either. He had simply become a distant, unpleasant memory, overshadowed entirely by the happiness that had grown in the aftermath of his failed schemes. Peter Lang remained close to the family, serving as Nathaniel's most trusted advisor and eventually becoming a dear friend to Eleanor as well, often teasing the Duke gently about the unmarked carriage and false name that had first carried him to the Whitmore estate. "You very nearly gave yourself away entirely, that first visit," Peter said one evening, sharing dinner with the couple in their private dining room. "Arriving without a crest, introducing yourself under half a name, as though anyone in London would fail to recognize the Duke of Ashford eventually." "I was rather more concerned with being seen as myself than as my title," Nathaniel admitted, glancing fondly at his wife. "It seems to have worked out well enough in the end." "Rather better than well enough," Eleanor said, reaching for his hand across the table. "Though I confess, that first visit terrified me, nearly as much as it intrigued me. I could not decide whether to send you away or beg you to stay longer." "And which instinct won out, in the end?" Peter asked, smiling. "The one that mattered," Eleanor said simply, looking at her husband with the same open warmth that had grown steadily between them since that very first, unexpected visit. "The one that told me some risks are worth taking, however frightening they might seem at the time." As autumn deepened into winter, Eleanor found herself once again preparing for a grand ball, this one hosted by their own household, marking the anniversary of their wedding with the same warmth and celebration that had defined their union from its earliest days. She dressed carefully that evening, remembering, as she often did on such occasions, the ball where everything had truly begun, the fear that had driven her from her chair before midnight, the uncertainty that had followed her for weeks afterward. But as she descended the staircase that evening, finding Nathaniel waiting for her at the bottom with the same steady, devoted expression he had worn every day since their wedding, Eleanor felt none of that old fear remaining within her. Only gratitude and love, and a quiet, settled certainty that whatever future still awaited them, she would face it fully, seated firmly beside the man who had refused, from the very first night, to let her chair stay empty. The ball that evening passed in warmth and celebration, guests filling their home with laughter and music long into the night, and when the final dance arrived, Eleanor did not hesitate, did not glance toward the door with old instincts urging her to flee before midnight struck. Instead, she rose and took her husband's offered hand, moving with him through the familiar steps of a dance that had once changed both their lives so completely, and stayed until the very last note faded into comfortable, contented silence. Outside, snow had begun to fall gently over the estate's restored gardens, and somewhere in the quiet warmth of their home, a family that had once faced ruin now faced only the steady, unremarkable joy of an ordinary life, built carefully, deliberately, out of courage that had refused, even in its most frightened moments, to simply give up. Eleanor Whitmore, once a woman who fled ballrooms before midnight rather than risk being truly seen, had become Eleanor Grey, Duchess of Ashford, a woman who no longer needed to run from anything at all, because she had finally found, in the most unexpected of circumstances, exactly where she belonged.